Welcome back to Taking Control of Cancer, the podcast brought to you by the North East London Cancer Alliance. I'm Steve Bland, and this is part 2 of our double header from Highgate School, all about balls and testicular cancer. My two guests are James Green and Vicky Stubbs, and part 2 began by me asking them what happens after they deliver all the sessions to the pupils. What should the students do next?
So James and his colleagues did a lot of work around that, didn't you? To sort of streamline where the changes needed to be and where time was lost, if you like, and where things went wrong.
So we've done a lot of work, but I mean, basically with testicular cancer and testicular torsion are slightly different. Testicular cancer, both of them you should tell an adult, but then you should really seek medical advice. I mean, usually with a lump or a bump in the testicle or a large testicle, that would be via your local GP, and making an appointment, if they're young children with their parents involved, if they're older children or young adults to access that themselves, obviously. Testicular torsion is completely different. It's an absolute emergency. There's only 6 hours between actually having testicular torsion and the testicle dying. So at that point in time, you have to go to an emergency department. Testicular torsion is twisting of the testicles. So sometimes people have, mobile testicles that can actually twist. It's, it's again a small number of the population, but it's the commonest cause for testicular loss, as we've said in school boys. And therefore, and it just can happen at any time. It doesn't have to be with activity. It can happen at night. It can happen any time. But it's really, if you get excruciating pain in your testicle that lasts 1 hour, you really should seek medical advice, and that medical advice should be emergency advice, and please access that because something can be done about it, and we can save testicles if they get to an emergency room or casualty in time. Going back to cancer, if you have a lump or a bump in your testicle or a mass that you felt, you go and see your GP. The GP will examine you, and then they will usually, if they feel it's important, they will refer you to a hospital for an ultrasound. An ultrasound is the easy test to be able to diagnose if it's a problem or not. And
non-invasive.
It's non-invasive. It's just an ultrasound being wafted over the testicle, and it looks straight through the testicle, and it's a very easy diagnosis to make, as you say, with no intervention at all. But I have to say that not all lumps or bumps, not all people feel are cancers. That's the important thing. But it's important to get checked out and exclude that. So please don't worry if you find a lump and a bump. As we've said, not all lumps and bumps are testicular cancer, but they need to get checked out anyway. And the important thing is that then if it is found, it's found early, and then something can be done about it, which is the most important thing.
Do you find that kind of embarrassment, maybe, or some of the kids saying, it's one thing finding it, but I don't know if I'd actually go and see someone, have a doctor actually examine me?
No, exactly. So we spend a lot of time talking about almost sort of, it's one of the things the activities try and do, things like the ball game, is it makes them have to say stuff about their balls. Yeah. And so they're almost putting the words on their mouths already. So they're actually talking about them. They can't just sit and passively take in the information. They're actually having to use their words to talk about these conditions and to talk about their balls. And we say about how important it is to use these particular words, and we talk about using correct anatomical terms. So one of the first things they have to do is actually label a diagram and discuss what they've got for the different labels. So it's about practicing using the words and just removing that whole embarrassment. By the end, you've got kids, as I say, sticking their hand up and asking, what's a micropenis, or, just totally freely asking questions in the class. And once you've done that, you've broken through a really big barrier. And the animations that James is talking about on the website, they also talk about the language, and they show a little cartoon boy talking and saying, Mum, I've got pain, this is what my symptoms are like.
And that's the other thing, it's to reassure them that doctors see this all the time.
Exactly.
For us, examining testicles, examining the body is the bread and butter of what we do. So they may feel that embarrassment, but whoever they see will not feel embarrassed at all. They'll actually welcome them because they'll want to check them out. They'll want to find things earlier. So actually, the medical profession, who they are, will go and see, is actually very keen to, support them in this. And that's so it's two sides of the coin. It's them getting over that initial fear or that initial worry, but it's also to realise that actually the medical profession is, in a way welcoming, because they do it all the time. They want to help people with conditions and they want to reassure people, because as I said, not all lumps and bumps are going to be cancer. So actually just to see people, reassure people, say you're all right, and then go back to school or go back to what you're doing is a very nice thing to do, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
What level of knowledge do you have, or do you see when you first come in and talk to these kids? Because I imagine, compared to, if you were doing this 15 or 20 years ago, we have celebrities going on TV talking about their own experiences. We have people on social media, on Instagram, sharing their diagnoses of not just this kind of cancer, but in different kind of cancers and other health issues. What sort of level of knowledge do you find when you go in?
So it's really interesting. So if we separate out boys first, schoolboys, and then we talk about the adults afterwards. So the schoolboys generally, if we ask them before and after, or just at the end, say, how much did you know before you came in here? Probably, a third of them will have heard of testicular cancer, but not necessarily know it's relevant to them. Hardly anyone knows about testicular torsion, unless it's happened to someone that they knew really well.
Yeah, but even then you might not
and then it was a drama. Yeah, exactly. So they don't tend to know about that. When it comes to adults, the stats aren't that different, actually. Even school nurses, who will know quite a lot about testicular cancer, but maybe not enough about just how much it can affect teens. But they will generally know quite a lot about that. It will have been part of their training. But again, their knowledge on torsion is very variable. So I'm finding a hugely supportive audience in school nurses when we go in and train them. In the old days, school nurses would be in every school, so that would have a big impact. These days, sadly, that doesn't happen nearly as much as we would like. But what school nurses do have is access to the kids who may be less often in school for various reasons. And so they're a really important group to be targeting, because we want to make sure that we're not just reaching kids in school. We want to be sure we're reaching every boy in the UK, really, eventually. Obviously, this is a North East London pilot, and NELCA's very kindly funded us to try and do a really big push in North East London. But actually, there's a huge amount of interest. We went on a national thing recently where I talked to with James to SAFNA, which is a national nursing body, and there's been a lot of interest from that. And I also did a national PSHE association, which is Personal Social Health Education network, a meeting, and again, a huge amount of local authorities beyond London have shown interest in training.
We think everybody should benefit, don't we?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
We're very lucky to be supported where we are in North East London, but everybody could benefit from this, from
in the
all
long
backgrounds,
run.
all people, and we want to do that, really. That's the important thing.
And we're also exploring how we can reach people.
But you're talking about knowledge of the disease.
And faith groups.
You're talking about knowledge of the disease, but it's also what to do about it. The next stage is very important, as you talked about earlier. You don't always know what to do next, and that's quite hard, and that's why we've really included that in the lesson, because it's if you find this or if you suspect this, what are you going to do next? And that's why the lesson is good, because it explains that explicitly, and again, it almost gives permission, saying this is what you should be doing.
But that removes fear as well, I think.
It does,
doesn't it? Because it's like, I know what to do if
I know
I
what
find
to do,
this. And that's one of the questions we make them answer.
Exactly.
Do you know what to do if you find this and this?
It's not just a one-step process. It needs to you've got to think about examining yourself, find something, then think what to do about it, then go and do it. It's a step process, and you've got to take people on that journey. It's very, very important in the lesson and explain that, and that's reassuring, because if they do find something, they go, "Oh, I know what to do about it." You've got a solution in your mind, so it takes some of that fear away. I think, anyway.
The fear thing is interesting, with adults, let alone kids. But how do you kind of balance? Because you want to kind of shock them a bit, don't you? You want to say this is really serious, you've got to take this seriously. But on the flip side, it's really curable as well.
So that's a really interesting question, and a massively important one when it comes to anything to do with health education or relationships or sex, any of that education. Evidence shows that if you try and approach things from a shock-based perspective, it doesn't work. Right. People shut down. They just think, either this could never happen to me, it's too awful, I'm just not going to engage with it. Yeah. Or they're so busy being terrified that they can't really hear your messaging. Yeah. So actually, we want to say them enough for them to realize it's relevant to them. So that graph I was telling you about earlier, this is the age at which this could happen. In other words, could be you. But then we spend the rest of the time trying to remove shock and fear, because actually all the evidence shows that those are very negative and very traditional ways of trying to teach about this stuff. There's so much stuff for STIs. We always used to try and freak people out with ghastly diagrams of things that would happen to their
sexually transmitted
diseases.
If people don't know, sorry.
No, exactly. So look at this awful thing that could happen to your penis. It will literally fall off if we don't do that anymore, because hugely exaggerated for a start, and secondly, massively unhelpful. So it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, it's just trying to have a mature dialogue, isn't it, really? Yeah. Evidence-based, mature.
Let's have a comfortable discussion.
Have a comfortable discussion.
Yeah.
And then I think you can get through that, Steve. I think you can. And that's what we've tried to do. You've obviously got the parental resource as well. So if people go, the teachers are supported. So if there are discussions, if people are worried, they can discuss it with the teachers afterwards, or there are parental resources, they can discuss it with their parents. We try to be as supportive as possible in all the tools we've brought. And as I said, these have been properly assessed by educationalists objectively to us, and been given the kind of kite mark of education to make sure it fits all those criteria, and it isn't, by objective teachers assessing this work.
But one of the challenges is obviously, it's all very well me producing this and James putting lots of input in, because we know what we're doing with this stuff. One of the big challenges is we're trying to create resources that anybody can pick up and use to educate with. Yeah. And so hopefully a bit later we'll hear from a couple of people who've actually been teaching this, but they're not education experts in testicular health. Yeah. Nor was I when I started out.
But they're experts in talking to kids.
Yes, and exactly. I think that's the thing. So that's what we're trying to play on, is, let's use your relationship that you can build with young people to then get this information out there. And I think that's how you've got to design any health education, I think, so that we're exactly what you've just said. Let's play first on the idea that you know how to have a conversation with young people who are, especially teens, who some people find difficult to talk to, but actually teens love talking about themselves if you give them half a chance.
But also, it's important, you see, we went down this route because the teachers, as you say, are brilliant. It's their schools, they are good at teaching to their children. We looked at other models where, a doctor perhaps, or went into an assembly and taught in the middle of assembly, or went in, and it just wasn't, just didn't seem to fit.
That'd be more like the sort of shock thing.
Totally. That's the problem.
It's really scary.
Exactly. Go, all right, so we'll roll somebody out. They'll stand at the front of an enormous amount of people. And also it's the safety. If people were scared, if they were worried, you can't really support them in that environment. Whereas if you're in a lesson, it's a much more supportive environment. So we looked at other methods, but obviously came to this one because we thought this was the best method.
And also with a teacher, one of the things we say in the teacher guidance, because there's teacher guidance as well for how to approach this, and one of the things we say is, make sure if there's anyone in the classroom who's got a family member or themselves who's had any issues with cancer recently.
That's really interesting, that, isn't it?
Because I wonder how many kids... You can't have this coming out the blue at someone like that. They have to be prepared. Do you want to be in the lesson? And if you are, if you do you want to have some arrangement where you can go if you need to leave? That kind of stuff has to be built into the lesson. Yeah,
that's so interesting, because I wonder how many kids or how many parents actually know their grandparents, their great-grandparents, what's come before them in terms of not just testicular cancer, different kinds of cancers that might be related to other kind of cancers. Yeah. I wonder how many kids come in armed with that information.
Absolutely. And also, especially if they're thinking about something that happened to Granny, say, a while ago, medicine's moved on so much since then, but if you're a kid, you don't necessarily understand that. So Granny died horribly from XYZ, and now you're talking about, I might get this cancer. A classroom setup is so much safer because there's all these pastoral checks you would do before you taught the lesson for a start. And secondly, if someone's looking a bit woozy or a bit terrified during the lesson, you can follow up on that. And again, there's guidance for how to do that.
That's what my son, I think, feels quite often when he hears cancer mentioned. He thinks people who have cancer die. Yes. That's what happens.
Yes.
So I think it's so important, I think, to understand who you've got in the room.
Exactly.
It is. And also to say about early diagnosis, to say that, and also that medicine's moved on in lots of cases, so absolutely.
But as you're saying, the early diagnosis is key, isn't it?
It is. But
in this case, especially.
In some ways, to have those conversations is healthy as well, isn't it?
It's
to have those conversations, because rather than people bottle it up, if they're worried about things, it's good that they bring those out, isn't it, really? I think it's really important.
And your classroom teacher then, thinking of your son, your classroom teacher would actually know that was an area of sensitivity, and that might become then a bridge to being able to let out some of those really difficult feelings and fears, which is in itself important also.
Yeah, that's massively important. That's a lot, without going too much into him, that's a lot of stuff we've been doing recently. She died when he was just before his 3rd birthday, so he's a lot of his at the age where you sort of don't understand things. You sort of think you do, don't you, when you're 8, 9, 10, but you don't really. No. And I think his emotional maturity around, death and things like that. While my feeling and my guess was that it might have made him kind of more resilient and more understanding. Actually, it's a bit the opposite. He sort of catastrophizes things. He's very sensitive to anybody getting ill. Him, himself, anybody getting ill. Yeah. So it is. But I'm sure if that happened to another child, it probably would be completely different. You have to be, quite aware of, any different kind of way of
I don't know.
Learning.
I have a child with long-term health problems also, and she does tend to catastrophize. She has something really quite small happening. She goes, "Mom, I've got this thing on my finger." Yeah. And I'm like, "Okay, you're not going to die from that. It's all right." Yeah.
Like bang his knee and like scream like something terrible's happened. I'm like, just relax.
And then when something really serious happens to her, she's actually fine with it, and she's so tough. But when it's something small, we're like, "Oh my God!" Yeah.
James, before we finish, just one of the stats I mentioned earlier, since the early 90s, incidence rates of testicular cancer have gone up by 27%. Do we know what's happening with testicular cancer?
We don't actually. It's quite it's quite a hard area to research, epidemiologically. There's no, I'm being honest. I don't really think we do.
It's not necessarily related to some of the environmental factors that some cancers
are.
Well,
we don't know. There's the answer. People have suggested that, but it's, as I said, it's very hard to research. It's because it's quite a rare cancer. It's not easy to join all the dots up. That's the problem. Yeah. If it was a more common cancer, you might be able to do more epidemiological research looking at environmental issues, but nobody's been able to put their finger on it yet.
So it's not like change your behaviour on this front and you won't get testicular cancer.
No.
I mean,
that's kind of what I was meaning. Like people talk about obesity and healthy eating, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anything, everything in moderation. We know that lots of cancers are related to being overweight and poor diets and stuff like that. It may impact, but it's much earlier in life, you see. So that hasn't had such a massive impact. So it is still quite bemusing why it has gone up quite so much. Obviously, there's better diagnosis rates, etc. So there's always a slight increase in things like that as things are getting rolled out. But no, we are still interested in why it's happening. It's a very difficult area to research, really. From that point of view. So, but the message from that is, yes, it's not really about diet, it's not really about environment greatly. It's not your fault. It's just predetermined. It's just a spontaneous in nearly every case. It's except for a few rare familiar ones. It's a genetic change that's just purely spontaneous because, as I said, during puberty your testicles sparked into life, and therefore really the best way to prevent having a problem with it is to examine yourself regularly. And we say that should be usually in the bath or shower. We usually say that should be at least once a month. And and that's the best way to protect yourself against this problem, really. Don't think it's other things. Think it's just really bad luck in somebody's genetic change. But the way to prevent or to keep an eye out for it is to examine yourself regularly.
And these days, it used to be almost impossible if you said to a teenager, examine yourself once a month. By next month, your brain's somewhere else. But now we've got phones, haven't we? So, and our phones can have a calendar. We can set a reminder. Or we could even do it a little bit more often than that if it's easier once a week or whatever. And the whole bath thing, that's because it's warm and a bit
it's warm. It
relaxed,
lets the scrotum relax more, and it's easy to get around the testicle. The whole testicle relaxes. But you're right. It's changing behaviour. Going back to that, it's habit form. You just get in the habit. You just do it regularly. It's just get in the habit, do it. Hopefully nothing will ever happen to you. You won't ever find a lump or a bump. But actually, it's just a sensible thing to do when you're doing your own personal hygiene. It's just a sensible thing to do.
Might make a few more teenagers wash more often too.
Well, 9-year-olds, honestly, if he has one bath a week, it's lucky.
That's why I only say once a month, or at least once a month.
At least once a month would be fine. James and Vicky, thank you so much. That's been really, really, really interesting, and what a good bit of advice to finish on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve.
So, Vicky, we've just had a really good chat with obviously yourself and James, but now we are joined by one of the amazing teachers here at Highgate, Phil Bartlett, or Mr. Bartlett, as I will I will.
Hello. Hello.
Always feels funny.
Sir.
Sir, do I call you sir? I'll call you sir.
Call me as you wish.
Mr.
Really
Bartlett, sir. Yeah, so just tell us your experience of the work that Vicky has been doing with the testicular cancer education.
So my experience, my role here in school is head of year 7, and I've been working in the lower school for the last 3 years, and I've been delivering a PSHE session on testicular cancer and testicular torsion for each of those 3 years, and that's it, I suppose.
So what do you find is the reaction of the boys when you start talking about this stuff? Do they find it tricky at the beginning of the lesson? Do you think that Highgate prepares them pretty well with all the other stuff we do, so it's not awkward? How do you find it?
It's a good question. I think we're clear at the beginning of the lesson to kind of address what's coming up in the lesson, so they're well prepared.
Yeah.
And is it awkward? Not really, actually. I think you, as a member of staff, you sort of deliver as intended. And how's it received by the pupils? Pretty well. I think they like and respect the fact that they're just being talked to as males. I think that creates a focused atmosphere in the lesson. And an atmosphere that they feel respected for their individual person. And can it be awkward sometimes? I suppose so. Can I give you examples of awkwardness and difficult questions? Not really off the top of my head, actually. Nothing stands out in terms of awkwardness.
Okay.
But,
and did you find the boys sort of engaged quite well with the activities, like the ball game and the little testicle?
What's the ball game?
Now, in terms of the way I deliver it, if I'm totally honest, I don't get the children to get hands-on with the balls themselves.
Okay,
I demonstrate at the front.
Okay. Oh, is that for the plasticine bit?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Exactly.
So that's one of the options, isn't it? So you can either get the kids to actually make something with plasticine, or if your time is short, that bit can take a really long time.
Yeah.
So the other thing you can do is have a sort of, here's one I made earlier,
a little blue
kind of
piece of
session,
moment.
and so basically a plasticine testicle hanging off a string. So you do that as a demo.
I do as a demo.
And do you then pass around the testicle with a lump?
Yes, just to give exactly right. Yeah, just
so
to give them all
a feel
feel
of what it would feel like. Yeah, and there's a bit of giggling then, I'm sure.
Yeah, a bit of giggling, exactly. But it's not so much, not that I can.
That's really interesting.
That's what we were saying before, though, isn't it? Sometimes I think the perception, maybe in my perception, I asked you guys earlier, what reaction is there? Some sniggering, is there some giggling, some a bit of immaturity, but actually, you were saying the same. There is like a little bit sometimes, but that's quite normal. And once you get past that, you crack on, and actually, they deal with it very maturely.
Yeah, it's interesting that's been your experience in all the 3 years you're doing it. And generally speaking, do you think that they get the message about what they're supposed to do if they have a problem?
Yes, no doubt about it. I taught a student the lesson last year, in year 7 the student was.
Yeah.
And a few months later, actually, the student themselves suffered from testicular torsion.
Okay.
And then I'm hoping that the lesson helped inform the fact that he then spoke to his parents about it, and then he got the medical care he needed quite quickly.
That's brilliant.
So it's quite rewarding that lesson that I delivered potentially had a direct impact on him, saving his.
And we know of at least one other torsion case here before that, so that's amazing that we've actually had that impact. That's brilliant. And in terms of the testicular cancer, obviously cancer is quite a scary subject for some kids because their previous experience might have been of older relatives having much worse health outcomes. Do you have to do any preparation around that, or are you finding that there's much of a kind of almost a backlash of fear around that, or does the lesson handle things in a way that enables that to be deconstructed?
I think definitely the latter. I think students are always comfortable in PSHE lessons that if something is sensitive or difficult, that they can take a little break and wait outside the lesson, just outside the door. In those lessons, I've never had that experience.
That's brilliant. That's really brilliant.
And yes, because I know it's a difficult subject that can touch the pupils personally.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, no concerns from me actually. No, they
do you see them talking to each other about these things? Maybe you don't. I mean, if they're talking to each other, they aren't talking to you. But like, do you get the perception that it does increase the I have a 9-year-old son, and I think I'd love for him to be able to talk to his friends about these things that, that I would never have talked to my friends about when I was that age.
Yes, quite.
Do you get the idea that maybe they do talk to each other about these things?
Is it more normalised, I guess?
Precisely. I think you're right. I can imagine them having break time conversations about it. I think when we deliver PSHE, it's always period 1, so they move straight from period 1 into their next lesson. Yeah. So you don't necessarily hear that post-lesson chatter. Yeah. But I can definitely, precisely as you said, I can definitely imagine it normalises it a bit and makes them feel like that it's okay to chat about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just this, but other
bodies,
other health questions, bodies, in general, understanding your body and being able to talk about them.
Absolutely, totally agree.
So as a teacher who gets landed with this thing that you've got to teach, are you a fan? Do you think it's a good thing to be teaching? And would you reckon other schools should be teaching this stuff as well?
Certainly would. I am a fan. I definitely recommend other schools would teach it as well.
Has it helped you with your understanding, your education? Because I wonder if the teachers dealing with it are teachers delivering it. I mean, you guys must also learn a thing or two, I imagine.
Absolutely, that's really true. They say that when you read something or hear something, you don't retain that much of it. When you teach it, you retain up to 90% of it, and the teachers delivering it will have that direct impact. And also, then they would normalise that conversation amongst their friends, family, etc., etc.
Yeah, it's one of the things I find when I do training. Actually, is so many teachers and nurses and everybody else, even local authority leads, will say, gosh, I didn't know that. I'm going to go home and talk to my son,
Yeah.
So I think probably for teachers it gives you that as well if you become a parent at any point with a son or an uncle or then 100%. Gives you useful information.
Definitely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Bartlett, sir, thank you very much. Phil, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Phil.
No problem.
Really appreciate it.